Hello everyone. Lorna sure have been an extremely popular band ever since they burst on the scene, but it was not until Will Ramos took the helm as the lead vocalist that they catapulted into a shit ton of popularity. And there have been a lot of questions throughout time of how to replicate his vocals, because not only has he been seen as an ingenious vocalist, but someone who employs a variety of techniques and sounds that people are interested in. And unfortunately, there have been a lot of videos that have come out that have went into the nitty-gritty without talking about the basics of how he constructs a lot of his sounds. I'm someone that has been doing metal vocals for about 7-8 years now, and one thing that I have practiced throughout time is mimicking my favorite vocalists, mimicking certain techniques, and if I don't know how to do something, I try to learn how to do something. And the thing that I wanted to do in this video is I want to cut the fluff out and just get to the meat and bones of how to replicate some of Will Ramos's most popular vocal techniques so that you can scream and growl like him and try to improve your own vocals along the way. I'm not going to be going into some of the very expert level things. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break up some of his techniques and talk to you guys about ways that you can practice and get down some different techniques to be able to replicate his vocals and scream and growl like him. Now, right off the bat, the thing that you're going to hear a lot from most people that teach about screaming and growling, and I want to just get this out of the way because I don't want to go on and on about it, there are a lot of people that will talk immediately about the diaphragm, which, yes, this is by far the most important thing, just because if you are not pulling air in and using and constricting your diaphragm while doing metal vocals or vocals in general, you're going to strain yourself. And so the one thing that I'm going to say here is there are hundreds of fantastic tutorials online that you can see about how to get down diaphragm support and things of that nature. And I'm going to assume that if you're stepping into this video, you already know the basics about diaphragm support, because at the end of the day, the #1 golden rule about any sort of metal vocal, whether you're trying to impersonate Will Ramos or Phil Bozeman or Randy Blythe, is if the vocals hurt or you feel strained or like you have fucking fucked your voice up afterwards, you're probably not doing it right. And that's not a bad thing, it's just you're going to do permanent damage to your voice. I have been doing metal vocals for about, like I said, 7 or 8 years, and around the start, I would feel so hoarse and scratchy after. I'd be having to take sips of water after every single time that I was doing a vocal, and just in the long run, your vocals are going to sound better if they are not coming straight from the throat. Because if they are coming from the throat, not only are you going to strain your voice over time, but you're also going to have less air, you're going to be able to hold notes less, and they're just going to sound shaky. For example, if I was to try to do like a typical black metal shriek and I was not using any diaphragm support or anything from the gut and just going straight for my throat, it's going to hurt like shit, and it's going to come out sounding a lot flatter, and it's going to come out sounding maybe more piercing in the moment. But if you look at bands like Asking Alexandria and Bring Me the Horizon, Danny Worsnop and Oliver Sykes have had tons of issues throughout the years because of how much they fuck their voice up. It may sound cool, but in the long run, it's just going to hurt you. So in general, if you're able to hold a shriek for like 3 seconds and it sounds like ah, and it like hurts your fucking voice and you're having to like deep throat gallons of water afterwards, maybe lay off and just try to get some of the general technique for diaphragm support down prior. Now, with that being said, let's go into some of the basic things that Will Ramos does to construct his vocal style. Will Ramos's range may sound extremely phenomenal, but you can break it down fairly easily by looking at some of the core things that he does. And the primary thing that I notice is tongue placement and mouth placement. And this is what makes his range feel more expansive than it necessarily is. And obviously, Will Ramos is one of the most fantastic metal vocalists on the scene right now, but I think some people overcomplicate it by acting like he does something completely different from all of his vocals, but actually he is just changing the way that he works with his mouth, that he works with his tongue, and that he works with his throat. And a lot of this comes down to constricting the type of air that you are getting when you produce your notes. Let's talk about some of his gnarly lows. He is fantastic at doing the sort of Alex Terrible, Cookie Monster, like Dickie Allen sort of growls. They sound horrendous. And I want to teach you very simply how you can get a more monstrous and destructive, disastrous timbre to your death growls to really give you that full resonance. Now, I want to also say that I'm not touching up this audio, whatever, so I'm literally just recording this with my Blue Yeti. So if they sound, I guess, a little bit raw, that's why, but I'm mostly doing it it as an example that if you audio engineer after, they're going to sound even better, but you don't have to have fancy audio engineering or a fancy microphone to get some fantastic metal vocals. So sucking in from the diaphragm and using chest and stomach support, you can get a pretty good death growl by making an O shape with your mouth and trying to produce more constricted air. The most important thing about death growls in comparison with more fry type of screams and higher pitch screams is you want to make sure that your neck is relaxed throughout the entire thing. If you are straining your neck muscles, specifically, you will feel tension in the sides. If you are doing growls incorrectly specifically, you are going to make the sides of your neck feel very tense, and you're going to feel like you're just like all tensed up. So just try to keep your neck as relaxed as possible. If you can, try to arch your chin up a little bit to provide a little bit more resonance as well, because one of the biggest things that you can do for growl resonance is to lift your chin up to make sure you have a nice volume and resonance to your sound. Now, the big difference between death growls and shrieks and fry screams and those types of vocals is the less sort of open mouth you have, the more low-pitched and distorted it's going to sound. Now, I'm going to go into distortion in a minute, but let's just go over the basic death growl that he does. So if you're sucking in with your diaphragm, and if you use proper chest support, and you make an O shape with your mouth, try to produce from the back of your throat while your neck is very, just not tense, very relaxed. And it should come out sounding somewhat like this. Very steady. You're not really expending too much air that way. Now, the one thing that I will say is one thing that he is able to do very successfully is he incorporates a lot of fry and distortion in his growls to hold them for longer periods. You will get better the more you practice diaphragm support when it comes to death growls, because the one thing about death growls, they do take more air than a shriek or a fry. That's why in a lot of metalcore bands, you hear these vocalists being able to hold fries effortlessly for 30, 40 seconds at a time. It is because the place that it is resonating from, around the soft palate and around the vocal cords, it requires less breath to produce. And because a death growl is coming much more from the gut specifically, you should be able to feel a lot of that resonance. And another way to know if you are successfully doing death growls in the proper way is to put a hand on the top of your chest when you are doing a growl. You should feel a reverberation. You should feel a shaking and a vibrating sort of feeling. If you feel more shakiness and like vibration in your throat, specifically around where the Adam's apple would be like for a man, if you press in, you're immediately going to sound more shaky. And so if I were to try to do the same death growl but produce it from the throat, it is going to break quicker and it's going to sound shakier, to where it's going to sound something like this, just for example. It sounds cool, and it can be used for certain things, but it's not going to be nearly as clean as just using that diaphragm support, making that O shape, not doing much constriction in your neck area, and just sliding into just an unmoving Now let's move into tongue placement and mouth placement. This is where he creates some of his fucking insane monstrous vocals, similar to an Alex Terrible. Now I'm going to go over two sounds that he is able to make. Now, both of these have to do with a similar placement of the tongue, and I'm going to get a little up close and personal to show you how this works. So, what I like to call his fucking, like, dungeon growl sound, I will get into in a moment, but I'm just going to go over how he makes more of a cavernous death growl sound. And this goes a lot of times for shrieks as well, but this is specifically a technique that is employed a lot in death growls to make that resonance. If you were to take your tongue and lay it flat folded on the bottom of your mouth, I will show you what it looks like. So when you do it, it should look something like this. It should look like it's curling and curving to the bottom of your mouth behind your teeth, to where the only place that air is escaping is on the top of your tongue and the sides of your mouth. And this a lot of times will make a normal death growl sound a lot more monstrous and cavernous. So a normal death growl would be like, ooh. But if you put your tongue in a certain placement, the one I just did, like that, behind the teeth, same death growl turns into this. I like to call that more of like a folded sound and a more sort of despondent and discordant sort of sound. But then I'm going to go into what I call his dungeon growl goblin sound. And you probably have heard this before. It sounds something like this. This one is a little bit harder to do than the normal death growl sound, but it employs a similar sort of thing. This one has more of an open sound, and this is where you can start to learn how to construct different growls and different screams by changing the way that you place your tongue in your mouth in conjunction with each other. So in sort of as slow motion as possible, this might sound a little rickety, but I want you guys to get the point in a simple manner. If you were to do the first vocal that I just showed you in the standard sort of just O shape, but then slowly start to expand it, you are going to notice a gradual shift in how the distortion comes through. And like I said, I'll go into distortion in a moment. So if I were to just do the normal growl and then slowly widen my mouth, but not change the placement of my tongue or the airway, you will notice how it changes over time. To where the wider it goes, and if you don't start from that general position, you can start with a growl that sounds more similar to this. And this is where distortion starts to play a role. So a lot of times you will hear people talk about how in a fry scream or a growl you just need to add distortion. Well, what the fuck is the layman term for distortion? How can I explain distortion in a way that doesn't go on a 10-minute rant? Generally speaking, a lot of times something that gives these bands a lot more punch in post-production, just from, I'm coming from like an audio engineer type of background, it's mostly distortion effects and equalization and specifically heavy compression. But there are some vocalists that are able to successfully do distortion very cleanly in their music, namely people like Alex Terrible, Dickie Allen, Will Ramos, because if you watch live performances, they're still able to have that really distorted sound. And in the vocal that I did pile a lot of distortion onto that. If I wasn't adding distortion to that sort of goblin scream, it would sound a lot flatter and lifeless and not as punchy. So when you learn how to do distortion properly, you should be able to switch between cleaner vocals and distorted vocals without breaking the bridge between the two. Now, a couple of tips I can give right off the bat is, please God, fuck's sake, do this with hydration. Distorted vocals specifically, if that is the sound you are going for, requires a lot of open throat. And you'll hear that term a lot, not only in metal vocals, but singing in general, an open throat. And this goes back to what I was saying at the start of the video, of staying completely relaxed. The most important thing about distortion is when you have this open throat, it allows air to pass through your vocal cords more tensely. And that may seem a little counterproductive with how I'm explaining it. But what I mean is, when you have a closed throat and your muscles are all fucking tensed up, you are not going to be able to create a distorted sound without straining your voice. And I'm going to teach you some really fucking stupid ways to practice this. And obviously throughout time you'll get better at this, because I can't just explain how to just get distortion immediately, because if anyone tells you that you can learn how to do vocals like this overnight, they're bullshitting you and just trying to get you on a fast track to fuck your voice up. So I'll go over 2 practices that I think will help you not only master distortion in your vocals, both for growls and screams, but also will teach you some of the fundamentals of doing fry screams. So the first one, when I go into fry screams, is make a natural fry with your voice. A fry is when your voice breaks between a bridge, most of the time between registers. But the simplest way to describe it is, imagine you are very hoarse and you just had like 6 sneezes in a row. You just threw up and you feel horrible. And you go to make a sigh, but because your voice is so hoarse, it just comes out sounding like You will usually feel a fry in the bottom of your throat most of the time. And the general thought of this practice is becoming more in control of the fries, making them sound more steady and not as broken, and slowly starting to increase the volume of those fries throughout time to where you are able to successfully blend the two in. And this goes hand in hand with my other practice example. And this is gonna sound really, really stupid, but bear with me, most practice things sound very stupid when you're doing them. So imagine that you are screaming out to someone, and imagine that you are trying to tell them no because you see them about to walk in front of traffic. But instead of just screaming to them, you try to hold that sound at the bottom of your throat while you are using that diaphragm support to where you are trying to hold it as steadily as possible. And this is gonna sound stupid, but this is what it would sound like. Now, of course, I don't expect people to have that sort of volume and resonance to them when you are first starting, because it is hard to hold that sort of resonance. And that is a big thing with distortion and fries, is just getting down resonance and proper breath support. Just make sure you are watching after your vocals, make sure you are staying hydrated and keeping your neck muscles as relaxed as possible. So if you are doing those two examples together, maybe try to combine them once you get comfortable with both. And if at any point your voice hurts, definitely stop. But let's take that first thing I mentioned. So, and then let's say you wanted to slowly increase that to the second one while not losing track of that initial fry, to where you can blend the two in with each other and go from a fry sort of sound to a distorted sound to where the two end up mixing with each other. So it would end up sounding like It sounds really stupid, and obviously no vocals are just going to end up sounding like that, but it's about getting the technique down to where you are able to do these vocals more proficiently while knowing the proper techniques to not harm your voice in the process, but also get proper technique down for distortion and fries. I'm not going to go too much into fries here because generally speaking, you don't hear many fries in deathcore, and Will Ramos doesn't typically do many fries, but the fundamentals of fries go hand in hand a lot of times with distortion and how he approaches doing his growls. It's just mastering that support. Keep in mind what I said in the beginning. All of Will Ramos's vocals, think of them like branches on a big tree, or a couple of big trees. The way that he approaches his vocals, the way that I would describe it is he has three very distinct sounds, and then he morphs those sounds to increase his range. Think of it kind of like a Travis Ryan from Cattle Decapitation. He approaches his distorted and fry-like vocals, his growl-type vocals, and his shriek-type vocals, but then molds his mouth and tongue in a specific way. And if you are able to get down a specific sound that I'm describing in this video and teaching how to accomplish, play around with how you position your mouth. And unfortunately, I just don't hear many tutorials talking about this, but the general thing about changing up your vocals is literally just tongue placement in metal. It's a lot different than typical traditional singing, because with traditional singing, you're working with keys and registers, and you're trying to be harmonious and trying to do that type of thing, whereas with metal vocals, which can be harmonious in their own way, you are more so using the mouth as a completely separate instrument than what would be conceived if you were just doing normal singing techniques. But you would be surprised how much overlap there is between singing and growls. Because in typical singing, you can look at rock vocalists, pop punk vocalists, pop vocalists, R&B vocalists, and similar things about fry and distortion, vocal control, as well as breath support and using the diaphragm correctly are all things that are within that sort of realm. The only major difference in metal is you are utilizing how you shape your mouth to create those sounds. So before we go into the final section of this video, let's go over some of the rules of thumb when it comes to mouth placement. I will say this in the easiest way I can. The bigger or smaller that you make your mouth shape, the more muted or open the sound is going to be. So if I were to place my tongue on the side of my mouth, like this, you can't really see it, but it's over there. If I did this, and then I made my mouth extremely small, that death growl would turn into this. Very low and bassy, not much resonance to it. But if I did that same thing and had a wider mouth placement, it would become And just for the sake of showing that it really isn't complicated to mess around with mouth placement, once you have proper breath support and diaphragm support, your vocals can be as constricted or as wide as you choose them to be, or as the song or cover calls for. So let me just do a standard death growl for this, and I'm gonna start extremely low and bassy, guttural, similar to what you would get from like a Cannibal Corpse, and then I'm gonna slowly go into one of the more dungeon-esque screams that Will Ramos goes into. I'm not gonna be fucking around with my tongue at all, and this is all done solely with how you position your mouth. So we're gonna start very simply. Notice how just the slightest changes and variations in widening the mouth can make a sound that is a lot more And just for the sake of showing this, this is the exact same for shrieks. So the biggest tip, if you take one thing away from this entire video, not just for Will Ramos, but vocals in general, is fuck around with your mouth placement, how wide or how closed you make it, and make sure to keep your neck as relaxed as possible, so that when you're swapping between these, it should sound very seamless. If you're cracking between them, you most likely don't have great breath support, and that is something to look into with other tutorials. Like if you're wheezing or you're struggling to hold a note, you should be able to transfer between shriek and growl resonance comfortably and with that distortion. If you see fucking veins popping out of your neck, if you feel like your hands are tingling, if you feel like your eyes are about to pop out of your head, or something that happened to me back when I first started doing vocals, the classic black lines in your eyes after you do a very difficult vocal, please take a step back, reevaluate your technique, and stop pushing yourself. But finally, and this should be a little more straightforward because I've already went over some of the fundamentals to make the sound happen, I will go into some of his more black metal-esque shrieks. Now, a lot of deathcore vocalists in the modern age have started to adopt black metal shrieks within their repertoire, and honestly, the black metal shriek is nothing new in deathcore. Ever since the days of Count Your Blessings from Bring Me the Horizon, this has happened. Or Mitch Lucker and Suicide Silence, these evil black metal shrieks, they're sort of storytelling-esque. Now, generally speaking, these vocals will almost always have a shit ton of distortion on them. As opposed to death growls, which can be a lot more dull at times and intentionally muted, shrieks usually employ a lot of throat support and distortion to them. And this is another thing where he's kind of tricking you sometimes with his technique, because he is honest to God just making a normal black metal shriek but applying tongue placement. And let me show you what I mean by that. So if you think that Will Ramos' shriek vocals are extremely difficult to do, here's a quick tip. But let's change that up a little bit. Let's just do a very simple example of something. Let's do the curved tongue at the back of the teeth that I did to make the dungeon growl with death growls. That same shriek becomes... Another way to modify this is, instead of putting it behind the teeth, curve it right on the bottom of the lip, like right here. Put it on the opposite side of your teeth, so where it's sitting like that, and then that same thing will become... So using the techniques that we have been learning in this video and that you have hopefully been learning on your own time, play around with your tongue placement, play around with your mouth placement, and you can make a normal vocal sound so much more disastrous. You can play around with it and make something completely normal start to sound a lot more demonic. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you this, but for the final lesson, if I were to do a normal shriek, and then do the tongue thing as I was doing it, you will notice the immediate difference. And I don't know if it's going to be able to show because I'm going to keep my mouth fairly closed for this one. Immediately, it sounds more evil and demonic, and it just sounds great. So I hope that this video helped you guys learn a little bit about how to do metal vocals like Will Ramos and some of your other favorite deathcore or metalcore vocalists. And if you would like more tutorials that go more in depth with certain things, definitely let me know down in the comment section below. I would love to hear it. I had a ton of fun making this. Be sure to like this video and show some support if you enjoyed it. Drop a subscribe to join the review family today and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris and I'm signing off saying,